Welcome everybody to this Honeybee Watch Symposium today. My name is Steve Rogenstein. I'm Honeybee Watch's project director and your host today. I'm joined by Arrigo, our science director. Today we have three very special guests who will talk about their inspirational projects and experiences with bees and beekeeping in Africa. And then that will be followed by a panel discussion and then a Q&A. To start, I will briefly introduce Honeybee Watch. We are an international coalition tasked with better understanding how free-living honeybees survive via natural selection with little to no human intervention. And by free living, we mean bees that have chosen where they want to live, whether that's in a tree cavity, in a cliffside, in a cave, in the burrow of an animal, in the ground, buildings, and even abandoned beehives. The aim of Honeybee Watch is to find nature-based solutions to lower mortality rates, to increase beekeeping sustainability, and ultimately to protect these threatened populations. In our 5 years, we have already gotten more than 2,500 nest sites on 5 continents from research partners and participating citizen scientists. But if you visit our mapping platform, sadly, you'll see that Africa has been very low. We have low representation, but we hope to change that. So if you're based in Africa or you visited there or you know of people and they know of free living nest sites, we really encourage you to participate and plot those on the map and join the Honeybee Watch citizen science aspects. And Arrigo, if you could just drop into the chat where people can find the mapping platform. So some of the initiatives that we have partaken of in the last 5 years, a couple of years ago, we formed a task force to collaborate with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, also known as IUCN. That is the international governing body that determines the red list status of species. So they range from vulnerable to threatened to endangered to extinct or near extinction. And we're working with them to reassess the red list status of Apis mellifera in Europe. After about 2 years, we're ready to conclude that and submit a report. And hopefully that will get published before the end of this year, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll have some interesting news. And if you attended our last symposium in March, you already know that we're part of a consortium that applied for and was awarded a €1 million Biodiversa Plus grant from the European Commission to extensively study free-living colonies, which I may call FLCs at some point, and that's just because it's easier to say. And we'll extensively be studying them in France, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden for 3 years. And if you want to learn more about that, on our resources webpage, we posted that video from March. And with our primary mission of forming an international coalition, we've organized this Symposia Series, which is now in its 3rd year, to connect the community of free-living honeybee enthusiasts. Now I'll briefly contextualize the Honeybee Watch Symposia Series, especially for our new visitors. First of all, it's super exciting for us that more than 330 people have signed up for today's event. And already we are at 72 people. So thank you for your support. Thank you for attending. 3 years ago, we launched this series as a means to bring the community together, to introduce scientists and experts from around the world to one another, to facilitate the exchange of their expertise and data and best practices, to introduce you, the audience, to their work, and as I said before, to introduce you to one another. Through this Symposia series, we're also committed to exploring and discussing challenging topics. In the first year, we explored monitoring protocols, which led to an open source document that's free to download and use on our resources page. So if you know of a free living nest site, what we ask is that you register it in the mapping platform and then monitor it at least 4 times a year. And you can use that protocol from our resources page. In the first year of the series, we also discussed data rights and sharing, as well as how to define wild in the context of free living colonies. which continues to challenge us because I just had a conversation yesterday and somebody was asking about the wild bees. And I said, are you talking about the wild native solitary bees? Are you talking about wild honeybees? So there's always confusion about this word, which is why we choose free living colonies. In our second year, we explored bee lining, tree cavities, whether wild honeybees are wild bees too, which I'm sure you know the answer to that, and also best practices for communicating and recruiting for citizen science projects like Honeybee Watch. And this year we started in March with an introduction to Free Bee, that European Commission funded study. Today we move to Africa, and in September, we will hear from 3 PhD students' current research and data findings in South Africa, in Ireland and the UK, as well as Slovakia. And Matusz, I saw that you're here, so he will be speaking in September. Thank you for attending. And then to round out the year in December, we'll explore bee-related policy issues. More information can be found on our events webpage. So that brings us to today's program, titled Africa, Nature-Based Traditions and Techniques. As many of you know, Honeybee Watch is making a concerted effort to expand into Africa. We claim to be global, but we kind of fall short on that. And because Africa comprises the native geographic range of Apis mellifera, it's a natural place for us to have a presence. And we want to have a meaningful presence. And to that end, last month we gathered 80 bee scientists, beekeepers, foresters, farmers, and policymakers from 25 countries on the continent for a working webinar to explore the opportunities and challenges and needs and general interest in studying and protecting free-living colonies there. And today's program continues in that vein and is a testament to our commitment to that. So we have a real treat for you today. We'll hear from 3 very passionate people who represent different lands, different projects, different perspectives. And in advance, we're grateful for their participation. And our first guest, Dr. Janet Lowore, she has worked at the nonprofit charity Bees for Development for 20 years. And among other goals, they've been working tirelessly for 30 years on the continent to help people escape poverty through beekeeping. There are other adjunct initiatives and goals, but that is one of the primary ones. I met their founder, Nicola Broadbeer, who's with us today. Hello. I met her several years ago and was smitten by their mission, initiatives, and resounding success. And seeing parallels between our 2 organizations, a dream to collaborate with them was born. So to explore those possibilities, I reached out to Janet, their director of programs, and if I'm stating it correctly, they're African specialist. Over the years, we've exchanged emails, we've spoken a couple of times, and what advice I took from her was to first better understand the situation in Africa, to understand how large and disparate the continent is and all the different regions and the personalities and attributes and circumstances. I also learned to better understand the interests and opportunities and challenges of the different communities that we might want to work with. And most importantly, to understand what research questions might best match those communities' distinct needs. So, giving credit where credit is due, thank you, Janet, for planting that seed and providing concrete direction. With that intro, if you could, I see you've unmuted yourself. If you could share your screen. Are you ready?
All right. Yes, I'm ready.
Super. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Steve. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me today. My name is Janet Lowore, and today I'm going to talk about nature-based beekeeping in Africa. And if there's one thing I'd like you to take away, really, is this concept or this terminology, nature-based beekeeping. There, particularly in the African context, the distinction between nature-based beekeeping and free living colonies is there's a very minimal distinction. So I think the overlap in terms of the the aims and mandate of Honeybee Watch and the concept of nature-based beekeeping are very strongly aligned. So as Steve said, I work for Bees for Development. So that's a charity based in the UK. We've worked in Africa for 30 years. I've worked for the organization for 20. And we're driven by the understanding that what's good for bees is good for people and is good for biodiversity. So our work really is directed towards supporting these relationships. So you see there that I am mentioning people. So we are a bee organization, but very much we're also an organization about people and how people use, keep, and benefit from bees, which in turn drives their enthusiasm and determination to maintain bee habitat. How do Apis mellifera live in Africa? For those of you who are from Africa, you know this very well. This is a Miombo forest in Zambia. The whole of the Miombo zone is full of honeybees, is excellent honeybee habitat. Apis mellifera is an extremely diverse and resilient species and has adapted itself to many, many different landscapes, including cloud forests in southwest Ethiopia, sheer savanna, dry sheer savanna in northern Uganda, transitional deciduous woodlands in eastern Ghana, many, many parts of Africa. Different landscapes will support honeybee populations. Also in this image, you will see on the left there, a beekeeper placing a hive made out of forest materials in the tree. And that is a very typical beekeeping system for many parts of Africa as well. And I was noticed, Steve, what you said about free living colonies are colonies that have chosen where to live. And you mentioned many different options, but you didn't actually mention deliberately placed hives. You mentioned uh, abandoned hives, I think, but not deliberately placed hives. So, and actually, for a lot of beekeepers in Africa, that is their beekeeping, is the deliberate making and placing of hives for to be occupied by free living colonies. Thereafter, of course, they will harvest honey, but their main driver really is not about managing the colony in the hive. It's about managing the habitat. So a beekeeper that's faced with this forest, that beekeeper in the tree, when he's faced with that forest, he's not just thinking about his hive and his bees, he is thinking about that forest and that habitat. What's happened to my slides? I just wanted to put up a slide really about beekeeping systems. There are lots of different ways of keeping bees. There are lots of different approaches to beekeeping, and very often we focus in our discussions and terminology on the hive, but a hive type is only one part of a beekeeping system. So in this image, I've presented 3 different beekeeping systems: forest beekeeping, smallholder beekeeping, intensive beekeeping. You'll see that, yeah, there are different hives, but also where and how the hives are placed. The one is placed in a tree, the other one's on a stand, the other one's on a truck. One beekeeper may be using, where do they get the bees from? One beekeeper may be using wild swarms, another beekeeper may be purchasing nukes of bees, another beekeeper may be splitting colonies. All these different actions all form part and parcel of a beekeeping systems. And so a beekeeping system should never be reduced to hive type. It's always important to look at all the aspects of the system. And the reason why I'm mentioning this really is because too often in Africa, in our experience, put it that way, there's a narrative that suggests that some that there are some beekeeping systems or some beehives are somehow the desirable type, and that are others which are considered old-fashioned. And we reject that way of looking at beekeeping systems and beehives completely. It's important to look at different systems in their entirety and to understand the resources, the skills, um, the inputs, the processes which are embedded within those systems. And then it's possible to begin to see that some systems suit some circumstances better than others. This is an interesting little quote that I found when I was doing my own research. And so I thought I'd share it. It's a quote from the Department of Agriculture of Zambia Annual Report 1937. This is nearly 100 years ago. I didn't find the original. I found it in somebody else's research, who had done some research about the social history of Mwinilunga in northern Zambia. And what this was written in this report from 1937 was that official schemes sought to improve and develop existing apicultural practices, but producers, i.e. the beekeepers, only adopted suggestions if these did not involve extra labor or capital inputs. And producers considered whether the requisite extra labor and capital inputs would pay off. So basically what they learned is that, improving, developing, or changing any system, a beekeeping system, always raised these questions in the beekeepers' minds. Okay, fine, I can do A, B, and C. But my interest is to get what I want, which is a good honey harvest with a minimal amount of labor and a minimal amount of capital investment. And that determination to, keep costs low is exactly the same for almost every beekeeper doing any beekeeping system. An intensive beekeeper like the one we saw in the previous slide on a truck is also trying to keep labor costs low. They're also trying to keep capital costs low. It's just their way of keeping their input costs low is about maybe increasing, having more hives in one place means it's efficient to have a truck. For a nature-based beekeeping, keeping costs low means drawing as much as possible on natural processes and natural resources, because these are available to many people who do not have access to financial resources and imported inputs. So let's just look a little bit more about what we mean by nature-based beekeeping. This is a beekeeping system where nature is center stage. So we're elevating natural processes and natural assets ahead of manipulated processes and external inputs. And we can break that down to look at the component parts. Genetics, so we're talking about the natural genetics of the honeybee population. We're talking about bees living as they do in the wild. So that means swarming, for example, migrating, for example. That's what bees do in Africa a lot, tropical bees. That's their natural ecology and behavior. Bees adapting themselves to this bee's ecology. So a nature-based beekeeper, instead of trying to change the bees, they change themselves. So if that means they have to put up hives at a certain time of year because that's when the bees are swarming, that's what they do. If it means putting bee hives in different locations because the bees are moving from A to B at a certain time of year, that's what they do. If it means spreading their hives over lots of areas because bees naturally nest over lots of areas, that's what they do. So the bees keepers are adapting to the nature of the bee. And it also means using hives made from natural materials. This is found very successful nature-based beekeeping is found across Africa. Just 2 case studies here. A case study from northwest Zambia, producing hundreds of tons of honey, which is exported to Europe. In Ghana, a new beekeeping and honey economic activity is growing in the Afram Plains area using nature-based systems, own-made hives located in the forest, producing tons of honey. So these are successful systems. This is the point I'm trying to make. Steve, in your introduction, you said that the driving force for Honeybee Watch was about bee health. Nature-based beekeeping is healthy and supports bee health in terms of supporting the genetics. Natural swarming maintains the genetic integrity of the honeybee population, and nature-based beekeepers do nothing to interfere with that process. The genes and the natural selection protect the population, not chemical treatments. So we widely understand in Africa, for example, that honeybee population is healthy. People don't need to use medicines to apply to their bees because the bees are healthy and well adapted. And that's a lot to do with the genetics and the genetic fitness that is maintained by nature-based beekeepers. Their bees that in their hives are a subset of the wider honeybee population, and genetically there is no distinction. There is no distinction between the honeybees living in a tree cavity or in a beehive located by the beekeeper. Nature-based beekeeping is healthy for the bees because there's very little interference, manipulation, stress, no artificial feed or medication, and the bees live as they do in nature. As I've said, the making and placing of a hive affords convenience to the beekeeper because it means that they know where it is and it's theirs. It makes it easy to harvest the honey. But to all intents and purposes, the bees live no differently to the wild honeybees. Nature-based beekeeping is good for bees, people, and biodiversity. People can earn an income, bee populations are healthy, and beekeepers are incentivized to maintain bee habitat. I like to sometimes reflect that in many forested landscapes in Africa, beekeepers are forest keepers ahead of being beekeepers. They're forest keepers. What can we learn? What next for nature-based beekeeping? I would suggest that nature-based beekeeping as a beekeeping system needs to be respected as such and not regarded as something outdated and of the past, and taught in colleges and universities across Africa as a practical, viable beekeeping system. It needs to be understood, and it needs to be understood that it doesn't just create honey and beeswax, it also creates a public good through the work that the beekeepers do in keeping forests. It would be amazing if the honey derived from nature-based beekeeping systems was better rewarded in the marketplace, and nature-based beekeepers should be respected for their knowledge and skills. Thank you very much.
Janet, you are perfectly on time. So thank you. If you want to take a screenshot, audience, of that last page, you can get in touch with Janet via her email there. You're right. I did omit that deliberately placed hives would be an option for the category of free living colonies. So thank you for correcting me. And what I really loved is this generalization, of course, of the situation in Africa. But I think for the people like myself who are based in Europe, it shows how different the situation is over there and how abundant the free living colonies are and how the whole system is different. That you don't need chemicals because the populations are healthy. That's mind-boggling for us. And I love that you call them forest keepers, not just beekeepers. And actually, Tibeebu, who is our next speaker, I think might reference that as well. So thank you very much, Janet. If you could.